up images of harmony and tranquility. But AMD's new Zen 3 based processors are set to really shake up the CPU game. Nothing tranquil about it. A little under 4 years ago, the first generation of Zen based CPUs were big news because it offered a good price to performance and was a very compelling value for those who needed a lot of computing power. But the biggest headline, of course, was that AMD chips no longer absolutely sucked compared to Intel counterparts. This time around, AMD hasn't just made something decent, it looks like they've snatched up the single-threaded performance crown from Intel, which has been with Intel for over a decade. So what is it about Zen 3 that allowed the Red team to pull ahead? Zen 3 is actually based on the same 7nm process as Zen 2, meaning that this isn't a generational improvement that comes from just cramming more transistors onto a chip. Instead, AMD made a few key improvements to the architecture, with branch prediction being one of them. Branch prediction is a key feature of virtually all modern processors, and it helps CPUs predict which instructions it will have to execute next before requests from other parts of the system arrive. This feature is responsible for a large amount of overall performance of modern CPUs, as well as the infamous Spectre and Meltdown bugs. AMD's new branch predictor not only has more bandwidth, but it can also recover from misses more quickly. That basically means that CPU can more easily right itself when the branch predictor makes an incorrect prediction. Another big change is to the cache. In case you're not familiar with CPU cache, it is a small amount of very high-speed memory that's built right into your CPU die and is intended to contain the data that the CPU needs to process extremely quickly. Zen 2 had 4 CPU cores, accessing a shared 16 MB level 3 cache. Well, Zen 3 doubles those numbers, with each CCS core complex having 8 cores sharing 32 megs of cache. AMD says that this makes up both core-to-core and core-to-cache communication more efficient. But what does this all add up to in terms of performance? AMD is boasting that Zen 3 has an instructions per clock increase of 19% over the previous generation, hence a big single-threaded performance boost, which is still, by the way, very important for gamers. AMD's internal benchmarks indicate that their top-end Zen 3 offering beats an Intel i9-10900K in 20 out of 30 games tested. Of course, you'll want to take first-party benchmarks like these with a grain of salt. AMD is pretty confident though that it's finally mostly achieved or even nudged ahead of Intel overall, saying that an average gaming performance is up 26% versus Zen 2. And outside raw gaming performance, that its 6-core Zen 3 chips beats an 10-core 10900K in a single-threaded Cinebench run. So Team Red is using that to appeal content creators. As for enthusiasts, AMD says you should be able to push your RAM to 4 GHz, a bit higher than Zen 2. Do remember, however, that if you're planning to buy your chip with an older 4000 series chipset, you'll probably be waiting until sometime next year for a compatible BIOS. The first few chips of the product stack range from the 6-core 12-thread Ryzen 5 5600X for $300 all the way up to 16-core 32-thread Ryzen 9 5950X for $800. Now some of these prices are actually more expensive than their Intel equivalents, but keep in mind that the IPC improvements, AMD still thinks they'll be a strong price to performance position. Now it does remain to be seen as Intel's next generation Rocket Lake desktop chips are due in first quarter of 2021. But are you going to wait and see how Team Blue fires back or picks up a Zen 3 chip right now? Speaking of things to do right now, you should hit the like button and also don't forget to subscribe.